When we see these stories in the Bible, we often wonder, what is the backstory, or what are the details that the Bible story doesn't tell us? For example, in the story that I'm about to tell you, where had this man been? What had he seen? What prompted him to go and see Jesus? Though we don't know these kinds of things, these motivations, we can study what we do know. And let's just see how much we can find out. This is the story of Jesus when he went back to Cana. After 2 days, Jesus went from Judea back to Capernaum. And the people of Capernaum welcomed him because they had seen the miracles that Jesus had done in Judea. And Jesus went back to the town of Cana where he had performed that first miracle, the wedding. Now there was an official who found out that Jesus was there, and he came when his son became ill to find Jesus and ask him to heal his son. And so when he found Jesus, he said, "Please come and heal my son," for his son was at the point of death. But Jesus replied to him, "Unless you see signs and miracles, signs and wonders, you will never believe." Well, the man said to Jesus, "Please, come and heal my son." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." And the man took Jesus at his word and went his own way. And he was going back home, and his servants met him on the way, and they said, "Your son is better." So the man asked his servants what time it was that his son became better. And they said it was yesterday at the 7th hour. And when the man knew that Jesus had said at that very hour, "Your son will live," he believed, and all his family with him. And this is the second sign that Jesus performed when he was in Cana in Galilee. Now, it's commonly thought of as acceptable to come up with things that may have contributed to this story. And we've all done Bible stories, I think you've been there, where somebody says, "Well, what do you think? Well, what do you think?" And before you know it, you don't really know what you can use. And I know it's also a lot of fun to watch shows like The Chosen that kind of give a backstory and kind of fill in some of the missing details. But when we're studying the Bible, it's most powerful when we see what details are there and stick to those details. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to discuss a story like this one where Jesus goes and heals the official's son. One of the ways that we can do this is through cause and effect. Cause and effect can be a short-term, immediate cause or a long-term effect of a person's actions. And this works with almost any Bible story and provides rich results. So when you look at, as for example, the official, you ask, what were choices that this official could have made? In this case, we could say that he could have stayed at home. He could have sent someone else to Jesus. He could have come to Jesus. He could have just prayed to God. What did he do when he had all these choices in front of him? And we see that the answer to that is that he did go and find Jesus. But then he had more choices. Could he cling to Jesus? Could he force Jesus back to his home? Or could he do it as he did and go on his way? So when we see these choices, then we also see the effect of these choices. First, the cause, the short-term cause. His son was made well. But then we also see a long-term effect. The man believed in all his family. And now I can imagine that because of this one incident, there are many more miracles and many more stories in this man's life, even into his old age. So that's what I mean when I say there are short-term causes and long-term effects. Another thing, God. It's become very common when we tell stories to ask, where does God show up in this story? And I think that works quite often. One of the things that I would say is that it's really helpful to think about the story in advance, because sometimes it takes asking some questions to kind of bring them to the big question. So for example, if I say, where does God show up in this story? They're going to say, he healed somebody. But there's a little more to that. We see a little bit in this story about how God sees faith, or what God expects from faith. And so it's a little more complex of an idea. So we kind of have to ask some questions. How did the man show faith? Did the man change in his way of showing faith? Again, getting all the evidence from the story and not from our imagination in this case. But we can use small questions to lead us to that big question: how does God show up, and how does God act? Another kind of way that you can get a good conversation out of a story is to look at clues that the story gives. So, for example, in this story, it made a big deal about saying that this was Jesus' second miracle. And that can give us a clue that it might have had something to do with Jesus' first miracle. And if we think deeply about the story, we can see that everyone in this city had seen Jesus do a miracle already. And that creates a good discussion point, which is found in the story. So just a couple words of advice. Try the best you can to stay in the story. Also, sometimes find smaller questions that can lead you to a bigger question if you're with a group that asks questions. Try and avoid the question why. When you say why, it opens up a whole bit of ambiguity. But if the answer to the why is in the story, then you can say why. But don't just say, why did Jesus do this? Why did Jesus choose 2 fish and not 4 fish? Don't say those questions, because they can lead to nowhere often. But then the last point is just the most important, which is when you do a discussion, try and steer people toward application, because that's the whole point of learning these stories, is that we learn how to apply them. So have fun telling your stories and discussing them, and I hope that you find some real treasures in your story.